And now to the war in Ukraine and new information on how both sides are getting new weapons. A U.S. official tells CBS News that North Korea started sending artillery to Russia.
North Korea have joined the tide. Washington claims that Pyongyang is supplying Moscow with artillery shells.
Ukrainian drones hit another North Korean artillery system. Ukraine announced that its military had shot down 3 long-range artillery systems supplied to Russia by North Korea. The announcement underscores the extent of the authoritarian Asian country's role in Russia's efforts to thwart the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kursk. As is well known, North Korea has played an important role in helping Russia in its fight against Ukrainian forces. Since the signing of the Mutual Defense Treaty in Pyongyang in June, North Korea and Russia have deepened their relations in various sectors. Since October 2024, between 10,000 and 12,000 North Korean soldiers have also been fighting on the front lines alongside Russian troops. Pyongyang even sent more than 100 short-range ballistic missiles to Russia in November 2024, and also supplied Moscow with artillery shells, self-propelled howitzers, and multiple rocket launchers. The self-propelled howitzer, one of the many weapons Pyongyang has supplied to Russia, was used in Donetsk, where Moscow's forces have long been in conflict with their Ukrainian counterparts. Reports from the war zone said Kyiv's unmanned systems forces had shot down the 5th artillery system supplied by Russia from North Korea in a month. An aerial reconnaissance unit of the 14th Separate Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Regiment spotted the M1978 howitzers hidden among trees and opened fire with coordinated fire from Ukrainian rocket artillery, the Ukrainian military said Wednesday. The M1978 Koksan self-propelled artillery system is North Korea's longest-range tube artillery. Equipped with a 170mm cannon, it has a range of up to 60 kilometers. The system was originally designed with the capacity to strike Seoul from north of the demilitarized zone. The M1989 Koksan, originally developed by North Korea, is armed with a 170mm cannon and can fire projectiles up to 60 kilometers. It also remains one of the longest-range conventional artillery pieces currently fielded by Russian forces. Now, the Russian armed forces are using it to compensate for artillery losses in the war against Ukraine. The Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces released new footage of the destruction of a North Korean self-propelled artillery system on the Donetsk front. According to a statement by the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces, operators of the 413th Raid Battalion detected and targeted a Russian-operated Koksan artillery platform. This engagement marks the 5th confirmed neutralization of this particular artillery system by unmanned troops in the last month alone. Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces neutralized another North Korean self-propelled artillery, the unit said in a post accompanying the video evidence. Operators of the 413th Raid Battalion of the Unmanned Systems Forces detected and shot down an enemy M1978 Koksan self-propelled gun on the Donetsk front. Ukrainian officials say that due to the scarcity of standard barreled artillery, the Russian military is increasingly relying on foreign-sourced artillery, including North Korean systems. Ukraine, however, claims to have destroyed more than 25,000 enemy artillery units since the start of the full-scale invasion. The United States Navy, for its part, says that 25,000 enemy artillery systems have been destroyed since the start of the war, and that, due to a shortage of barreled artillery, the Russian military is increasingly deploying Koksan supplied by North Korea. The M1978 and its upgraded version, the M1989, have been observed on the battlefield in recent months. Ukrainian forces reportedly shot down the first M2025 Koksan using a drone bomber during a night operation in Luhansk in December 1989. In a separate recent operation, drone operators from Ukraine's 14th Separate Special Purpose Regiment helped coordinate artillery strikes that destroyed 3 additional Koksan platforms. The targeting and destruction of long-range systems such as the Koksan underscores the growing role of unmanned systems in Ukraine's battlefield strategy, especially in contested areas such as Donetsk. On the other hand, Putin's close ally North Korea is increasing its military support for Russia as the war in Ukraine continues. North Korea has sent another 3,000 troops, missiles, and artillery support to help Russia in its war against Ukraine, the South Korean military said in a statement. It is known that Kim Jong-un's troops fighting against the Ukrainian army in the Kursk region of Russia have suffered heavy losses. Accordingly, North Korea is reportedly sending 3,000 more troops to Russia as part of its support for Moscow against Ukraine. This development comes amid growing concerns about the strengthening military relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang. It is understood that about 4,000 of the 12,000 troops sent by North Korea are missing, and about 3,000 more troops were sent as reinforcements between January and February. It will be recalled that North Korean fighters temporarily withdrew from the front line in January after suffering heavy losses. In addition to the troop deployment, Pyongyang has continued to send missiles, artillery equipment, and ammunition. It is estimated that a significant number of short-range ballistic missiles and around 220 Zoim 170mm self-propelled howitzers and 240mm multi-barrel rocket launchers have been delivered so far. South Korea's permanent representative to the United Nations on Wednesday called on North Korea to stop sacrificing its troops in exchange for aid from Russia, which has led to high casualty rates on the battlefield. South Korea's Thursday statement on Pyongyang's decision to send troops to Russia came after European leaders met in Paris to discuss aid and security guarantees for Ukraine. However, an analysis shows that a significant number of Russian tanks have been destroyed since the invasion. But are Russia running out of tanks? The Kremlin is certainly sending fewer tanks to the battlefield. They may be saving them for a major offensive. FPV drones may have pushed Russia to the bottom of the tank barrel. Ukraine's first-person view FPV drone hit a Russian tank and exploded. This was an increasingly commonplace event in the Russia-Ukraine war. Today, the number of Russian tanks that can be hit on Ukrainian battlefields is decreasing. Ukraine's Achilles UAV regiment, a strike unit deployed in the Kharkov sector of the war, released a video the other day of an FPV UAV zeroing in on a Russian T-72 tank and landing near the base of the tank's gun. It was a grainy video showing signs of jamming, but the parent unit, Joint Forces Group Kortitsia, called the attack a kill and praised Achilles pilots and support crew for a job well done. In February, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Ground Forces announced that Kyiv troops had passed a statistically significant milestone, registering the 10,000th enemy tank allegedly destroyed in the conflict. Most analysts estimate that, on average, 2 out of 3 Russian tanks were shot down by a Ukrainian drone. The Achilles strike in March added one more tank to this figure. Independent observers, such as the Independent Research Group, say they have been able to verify around 3,800 of Ukraine's claims, mostly using photographic evidence, while the real figure could be much higher. At the start of the war, according to Ukrainian claims, the Russian army lost around 750 tanks in the first 3 months of the war alone, 3 times the number of tanks in the British Royal Army. Given the devastation, the impending end of Russian tank supplies has been predicted for some time. Forbes magazine reported in April 2024, "The clock is ticking. Russia has a year's arms reserve in April 2024. But observers say the recent pace of Russian tank losses has slowed considerably. The group of officials put Russian tank losses between January and March 2025 at 133 vehicles, meaning that the pace of tank destruction is less than a fifth of what it was at the start of the war. Independent analyst research suggests that the Kremlin's reluctance or inability to deploy tanks to the battlefield, in numbers as large as in the past, is increasing. Russian daily tank losses peaked in April-May 2024 and have been declining ever since, according to an analysis published on Sunday by open-source researchers. As of March 2023, according to independent research, the number of tanks confirmed destroyed by all means during the month amounted to 25 vehicles, about 20% of the number of tanks the Russian army lost 11 months earlier, or 120 vehicles. The Ukrainian military's kill claims, which are often 2 or 3 times higher than the confirmed loss figures, show a similar pattern, with fewer tanks being hit than previously. According to official monthly claim destruction figures from the General Staff of the Ukrainian Ground Forces, Ukrainian troops destroyed about half as many Russian tanks in March 2025 as they destroyed in March 2024. Field reports from Ukrainian combat units tell much the same story. Soldiers are seeing fewer Russian tanks participating in attacks, which leads to fewer Russian tanks being destroyed. Eyewitness accounts say that instead of tanks, the Russians now prefer lightly armored vehicles or even civilian cars or motorcycles over heavily armored vehicles in their tactics. Ukrainian drone operators say this is probably because Ukrainian robotic drones often dominate the airspace in a battlefield and target tanks first, forcing the Russian military to attack with lighter, faster vehicles or on foot. Russian soldier testimonies, both by POWs and fighters, say much the same thing. Other researchers have observed another trend. Not only is the number of Russian tanks attacking declining, but also the types of tanks carrying out the attack appear to be drawn less and less from Russian tank reserves. The researchers' analysis of Russian daily losses the previous day revealed that only a fraction of the tanks fielded by the Russian army during the war, 25 to 30%, were relatively modern T-80 or T-90 models, while the lion's share, 50-70%, were T-72 tanks from the mid-Cold War era, T-62 tanks from the early Cold War, and even museum-quality T-55 tanks that were mothballed and sent to the battlefield. The data shows that there has been a drastic drop in the number of older tanks participating in Russian offensives over the past 6 months, suggesting that Russian tank reserves are dwindling or that the Kremlin's reluctance to send replacement tanks into combat is growing. The availability of Russia's basic T-72 tank model appears to be in decline, the researcher said in comments in March. Russian tank losses, as a percentage of total losses, show an unusual pattern, with T-80s now accounting for 2/3 of this month's losses. But according to the researchers, total tank losses have been on the decline for several months. So perhaps the bigger question is, where are the T-72s? They found a parallel trend of declining numbers of Russian tanks compared to other combat vehicles, a possible indication of a growing tank shortage in Russia, but also, at least in theory, possible evidence that more Russian light armored vehicles are becoming combat ready. In a February 2025 study, the UK's International Institute for Strategic Studies described Russian tank losses as staggering. The group noted that the equipment remaining in storage is likely to be worn out, poorly maintained, and possibly too rusted to be usable, all of which could make it difficult for Russia to deliver enough equipment to compensate for the loss rates in the coming months. At this point, after 3 years of war, the Russians have indeed begun to experience a certain physical, moral, and material exhaustion. And this is present and recognizable. At the same time, the number of Russian casualties in the war in Ukraine has increased by 1,280 in the last day. The total losses of Russian forces in the war against Ukraine between February 24, 2022 and March 26, 2025 amounted to approximately 907,220 personnel, 1,280 of them in the last day alone. Moreover, according to reports, Putin's Russia has run out of body bags while the death toll in Ukraine is rising. This striking fact is the latest evidence of the staggering losses suffered by Russian forces since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in February 2022. A Russian blogger has exposed the grim reality of Vladimir Putin's war against Ukraine. The author stated that the soldiers are actually running out of body bags. The Russian blogger made the remarks during a briefing shared on social media by Anton Gerashenko, a former advisor to the Ukrainian Interior Ministry. Referring to footage shot by Russian influencer Nastya Belka, "The way we spend military personnel by the number of units is really a nightmare. It was a very difficult video to watch." She tells a story and says that the situation was very bad there, where they bought a small number of body bags, among other supplies. The loss of equipment coincides with rumors that the Russian army is running out. According to official data, Ukrainian defense forces destroyed 10,430 Russian tanks, 21,685 armored combat vehicles, 25,207 artillery systems, 1,341 multi-barrel rocket launchers, 1,117 air defense systems, 370 aircraft, 335 helicopters, 30,818 operational tactical level UAVs, 3,121 cruise missiles, 28 warship boats, 1 submarine, 41,901 vehicles and fuel tankers, 3,786 special equipment units. On the other hand, Ukraine faced a growing drone threat as Russia added more launch bases in line with the ongoing war. Moscow has established 3 new launch bases in Primorsko-Atarsk, bringing the total to 10, further increasing its drone strike capabilities. Russia has established 3 new UAV launch bases to increase its ability to conduct large-scale Shahed drone strikes against Ukraine. According to RBC Ukraine, with the new launch sites in the Primorsko-Atarsk port area in the Sea of Azov, Russia's total number of launch sites has reached 10, and the number of drones launched at once is expected to increase. In recent months, Moscow has been refining its drone warfare tactics, launching swarms of both offensive and deceptive drones in an attempt to disrupt Ukraine's air defenses. During the attacks, these drones maneuver unpredictably, flying at different altitudes to avoid radar detection. According to reports, Russia can launch 100, 200 drones every night, further straining Ukraine's air defense systems. However, the Ukrainian defense forces are mounting an extraordinary defense against Russian airstrikes. In the early morning hours of Wednesday, March 26th, Russian forces launched 117 drones from 4 directions at targets across Ukraine. Ukrainian air defense units intercepted 56 drones, while 48 dummy drones failed to reach their targets. The Ukrainian Air Force also stepped up its strikes, successfully striking a Russian troop concentration area in Kondratyevka in the Kursk region, completely destroying the target and neutralizing nearly 30 enemy soldiers. The destruction of this military facility reduces Russia's ability to conduct combat operations against Ukrainian troops in the Sumy and Kursk regions. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said on its official social media account. The Ukrainian Air Force pilots, together with other units of the defense forces, will continue to target enemy positions in order to weaken Russia's military potential, the General Staff said. It will be recalled that the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, in coordination with the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense, missile forces and artillery units, destroyed 2 Russian Ka-52 attack helicopters and 2 Mi-8 helicopters in the Belgorod region of Russia. It was also reported that Ukrainian defenders destroyed 2 tanks and 3 trucks belonging to Russian troops in the Kharkov region with unmanned aerial vehicles. The Khortytsia Operational and Strategic Troops Command reported the incident in an official social media message and published a video of the combat work of the pilots of the 429th Achilles Drone Regiment. In the Kupiansk and Dvorichna regions, UAV crews shot down and destroyed 2 tanks, a tracked mine barrier, and 3 trucks, killed 7 invaders and wounded 4 others. In short, after Kiev's successful offensive, Russian casualties have reached a terrible milestone. The Ukrainian General Staff announced that 96 air-launched cruise missiles were destroyed in Ukraine's attack on a Russian military airfield last week. British defense officials described the attack on Engels 2 near Saratov, hundreds of kilometers from the Ukrainian border, as Kiev's most successful attack on a Russian ammunition depot this year. No aircraft were reportedly hit in the attack. The number of times Ukraine has destroyed Russian aircraft, including helicopters and airplanes, has exceeded 700. The attack on the Engels 2 airbase came on the eve of talks in Saudi Arabia between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations on a conditional ceasefire in the Black Sea, the details of which have not yet been finalized. Under the agreement, both sides will halt attacks on energy infrastructure. But Kiev has stepped up attacks on military installations in an attempt to damage Russia's war machine, and its announcement on Thursday implied that this would continue. Russian authorities declared a state of emergency after an attack on the Engels 2 airbase by Russian Tupolev Tu-95 and Tu-160 strategic bombers, capable of long-range nuclear and conventional strikes and used in the attack on Ukraine. Russia rarely acknowledges attacks on its military installations, and so the declaration on the night of March 19th demonstrated the seriousness of the attack. The footage shows smoke rising from the base, some 800 kilometers from Moscow, which Ukraine has previously targeted. Ukraine usually does not immediately claim responsibility for attacks on targets within Russia's borders. But Andriy Kovalenko of the National Security and Defense Council said on March 20th that the attack that destroyed Russian Kinzhal missiles was carried out by Kiev. On Thursday, Ukraine's General Staff said Russia had lost 96 winged airbase missiles intended to strike Ukraine. It also said that attacks on aviation fuel storage facilities had destroyed reserves. However, this comes after the British Ministry of Defense said on Tuesday that the area in question was struck by a drone. The British Defense Ministry said it was the most successful strike on Russian ammunition depots so far this year and a continuation of Ukraine's attacks deep inside Russia. It said the strike would disrupt offensive operations from the airfield and force Russia to replenish its ammunition stocks, while Russian aircraft would be dispersed to surrounding airfields. During the strike, Ukraine's defense ministry said that since the start of the war, Russia had lost 701 aircraft, including 331 helicopters and 370 aircraft. As of Thursday, the number, which has not been independently verified, was 705, with 4 more helicopters lost in the past week. The British Ministry of Defense's update stated that Russia's air defenses are struggling to protect its military positions, while Ukraine will continue to target these positions as Ukraine is conducting deep airstrikes in the Black Sea, while the details of the ceasefire are being worked out. So, what do you think about this issue? We will be glad if you specify in the comments. Thank you for watching us. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like to support us.